Do you like sci-fi, fantasy, action, adventure, and comic books? Then you've come to the right place for your weekly dose of anything and everything geek. So strap in and let's get this show on the road. Welcome to the Science Fictionary podcast. Welcome back to the Science Fictionary podcast, the official podcast of the sciencefictionary.com. I'm here tonight with Marisha.
Hey, everybody.
And David.
Hello.
And we're going to talk a little bit about, we kind of wrapped up our Pillars of Sci-Fi last week, and we're kind of gearing up. In the next week or two, we will launch our Pillars of Fantasy series.
Woohoo!
To get all those things. We've actually had a lot of suggestions from people for things that we should have included on our list. And a lot of them actually fell in the fantasy category.
Yep.
So,
like, I know we've had Gilgamesh thrown out there. We've
Right.
kind of had, like, Egyptian and Hindu mythology. We've had Wheel of Time thrown out there. And all of those things will be discussed in length.
yep. So we're gonna make a few little tweaks to our format for the Pillars of Fantasy, but we're really excited about doing that one. And that one seems to be, people are generally way more familiar with science fiction than they are with kind of what is the root of fantasy storytelling, and what are the things that shaped modern fantasy storytelling. And we'll kind of get into a little bit of what is the difference between the two. And so we're really excited. I know David's already, his list is already getting pretty lengthy.
Yeah. And I have an important question for you guys real quick that I thought would be cool to discuss here. Are we going to include epic poems under the novel/literature section, or is that miscellaneous?
That we were actually just discussing that earlier today. It's like, it's not, definitely not novels, but it is literature.
Right. But we read them in, I would say things like that probably in the literature category. But if they overflowed to the miscellaneous category, that's okay too. Kind of the way I look at the miscellaneous category is if you had 5 novels you really wanted to be in the list and you only got 4, then maybe the 5th one gets kicked over to the miscellaneous list. Because your miscellaneous list can be novels or movies or TV. And so,
Gotcha.
I mean, because I think that, well, the things we talk about is literature. I think we're talking, I think epic poems, Gilgamesh and Beowulf and things like that.
So, well, because I mean, the thing about them though is if they are like really the original version of them is an oral story and it just somebody wrote it down at some point, is it really primarily literature, or is it really primarily an oral story that just somebody finally documented?
Right.
So,
and I would say that
there's
probably
actually a couple different things that I already have in myth. Sorry.
And so I think it's kind of where we ended up, even though it says novels on the list, we kind of said literature. So, and I think your dad even threw a comic book in the literature, or maybe you did. One of y'all threw a comic book out there.
Did.
Okay, so you actually had a comic book in that category. So, I mean, yeah, I would say that you could certainly put things like the epic poems in the literature category.
it's going to be a free-for-all. See who can, everybody is going to claim an epic poem by the time it's all said and done, I think.
The thing is I think they belong. I think they belong there. And so, whether you're talking about writings of Homer or about Gilgamesh or Beowulf, I mean, those things certainly belong. Now with Beowulf, it's all those things have been translated numerous times and started off as verbal stories, not written stories. And so, but I would, I mean, I've kind of started fleshing out my list and in my working list for the first category, I do have Gilgamesh and Beowulf on my working list. So yes, I would certainly say that those things are acceptable to include in the first, in the literature list. It doesn't mean some of them might not wind up, but the thing is, if you're doing the foundations of everything that sci-fi. I mean, that's it. That
Fantasy?
early fairy tale. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, a fantasy is things like the epic poems and early fairy tales and things that aren't exactly novels. They're often oral tradition that has carried over into written tradition.
Right. And that's why I was saying that I think is interesting is that I'm actually having the most trouble narrowing down my misc list, my miscellaneous list,
Right.
Yep.
because there's so many different, like, science fiction is like, relatively speaking, science fiction is a new thing.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
I know we went into about how like true history and like these older things, but like you have something like fantasy that has been around since humans have been telling stories.
Exactly.
There's been fantasy, there's been legends, fairy tales.
Right.
So it's really hard to narrow down. And so that's why I think it's going to be a whole lot of fun talking about it. And we're going to bring up some interesting debates and trying to narrow it down to fit a list. This is a challenge. This is a challenge that we are undertaking here.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's so, since it's so much older. I mean, even if you want to call true histories, okay, if we're gonna like dub that the first science fiction, what, 2nd century AD? That's still,
It's still certainly fantasy.
but it's still in compared to Gilgamesh, for example, a really new invention. I mean,
Right.
compared to the kind of stories that you see in sacred texts, all over the world. I mean, the stories that are laid out, in Egyptian papyrus.
Well, so, yeah, most of the earliest written stories that we still have on record are
Yeah.
stories of fantasy.
So
It
yeah,
just blows my mind how old things are. Things like that. There are going to be things on our list that are older than the birth of Christ.
lots of
Which
them.
just blows my mind, you know?
Like when there was no
that's
Rome,
gonna be really
there was no, I mean, some of these stories are older than any civilization that we have ever seen. Like even the ruins of some of these civilizations that created these stories are gone, and that's pretty staggering.
Yeah, so that's going to be a really cool concept to get into.
So yeah, that will be coming up probably. You'll either get that next Thursday or the next. I'm not sure if we're going to have 1 week or two before we start that, but it is coming up really soon.
Soon, yep.
But this week, we kind of reached out to our listeners to see if they felt like there was anything in particular that we
Missed.
that we should have had on our list and didn't get it on there. And we didn't get just a ton of response to it. We had a few things that I felt like kind of were really more should really fall more into our fantasy category. In fact, we had a few things kind of offered up as suggestions that I'm like 99% sure will land in our Pillars of Fantasy
List, yeah.
But one of our listeners, the Backyard TARDIS, did send us in a number of things, and I thought we could talk over those real quick before we jump over to talk about Star Trek Into Darkness. He had plenty of suggestions, and the first one on his movies, and we're just going to kind of go through real quick, and talk about all of these, and how they kind of relate to what we've already done. But the first one on his list was Iron Man. And while it is relatively new, it is one of the movies that changed the way we really set a bar for what we expect to see when we watch a superhero movie.
Yeah. And even watching, as much as I love Tobey Maguire, and Spider-Man, it's like Iron Man changed it. It's like all of a sudden the gravitas and the humor and the just phenomenal special effects just all sort of met in this kind of perfect storm that, is definitely been really, really influential. It's like watching sci-fi like pre-Star Wars sci-fi and post-Star Wars sci-fi. It's kind of the same way with action movies, and especially superhero movies. It's like pre-Iron Man and post-Iron Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And Iron Man's one of the things that I thought about later and was like, I probably should have like at least talked about it or touched on it. We had a lot of movies in there, and plus, I actually did say like the Marvel comic book cosmic universe in general, but not just the cosmic universe. I really should have pointed out all of it, because like a guy walking around in a iron mech suit and a guy who was hit with radiation so becomes a raging monster and a super soldier. That's all sci-fi.
That's all sci-fi.
Yeah.
Yeah. Comic
That's
books are
science fiction.
You cannot understate the importance of comic books, whether it be in a comic book or what they've done with them on movie screens and TV screens, as being incredibly influential to sci-fi. And of course, Iron Man laid the foundation for the most successful movie franchise of all time.
Yep. Still just trucking on.
And what would eventually become just the most, the highest grossing movie ever made.
Right.
Which is insane.
And I mean, there's probably not even any comparison between the franchise, the amount of money that the franchise has made, and every other franchise. Even Star Wars. I mean, of course, every Star Wars movie just like breaks records, but there have been 10 Star Wars movies, 12 Star Wars movies at this point, and there are
something like
20-something MCU movies,
Right.
And they're not slowing down anytime soon.
No. This is going to keep growing, and it doesn't. It's. I don't know when it's going to stop.
I mean, at some point, presumably, Westerns were that way for a long time. It was like the fallback genre, and eventually, kind of the world kind of moved on from it, except my grandfather. He's still firmly team Gunsmoke and Bonanza. Just the same episodes over and over.
Right.
So maybe someday our kids will feel that way about.
The next thing.
Oh yeah, that's gonna be me. And
yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. The next thing on the list was Stargate.
Yeah.
Which I heavily considered Stargate. But I really, what I arrived at was you don't get Stargate without Star Trek.
Okay, but here's he's saying though movies. And whenever I think Stargate, I think the TV series, and this TV series is very Trekkian. The movie is not.
The movie is not.
The movie is, and like I really, as much as I really enjoy the Stargate series, I understand why the creators don't really love of the original movie, don't love it, because it's a really unique thing.
It is.
And it kind of got shoehorned into a kind of Star Trek style serial.
The serialized version.
But
although they did some things there that Star Trek, even in this TV series, they did a lot of things that Trek didn't do.
It's true.
Where they blended it with military science fiction.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's been hugely successful. He mentions that it has influenced like several made-for-TV movies and 3 different TV shows and a web series, which I actually like the web series. Have you watched it yet?
I haven't watched it yet.
Okay. But have you seen the Stargate movie, David?
I have seen the Stargate movie, and that's actually all I've seen. I haven't seen the series, just the movie. And I personally, I adore that movie for all of its faults and everything. I think it's great. And I did also think about it, but when I started thinking about it and I started researching to see what other people thought about it, because I know that I liked it, but I didn't know what other people thought and if it was really influential. It just didn't come across to me as something that was something that was even widely considered to be good.
Really?
I saw a lot of I saw a lot of mixed reaction from people who are fans of stuff like Star Trek and Star Wars. A lot of people saying that like Stargate is kind of this like it's just not on the same level, I guess, is what people were saying. I still adore it. I still like it. That was just my personal like what I found. Maybe I'm just read the wrong blogs and watched the wrong videos.
Who knows? I mean, Stargate
that's sort of what I came to.
Yeah, I mean, Stargate has an enormous following. That movie didn't necessarily review very well, but it's become one of the more beloved pieces of science fiction.
It's kind of a cult classic.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I can certainly, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't on my working list. It just didn't. That was kind of the hard thing about narrowing it down to 4. And honestly, I tried to stay. Because of what we were trying to do, I tried to stay as early as possible. And ultimately, that's kind of what shoved Stargate off my initial list. So I'm glad to see it show up on the listeners list.
Yeah. Well, because, there's been a lot more talk about, wormholes and that kind of thing. It was a really novel kind of concept approaching space travel, that doesn't space travel sans the ships.
Yeah.
And that's kind of been something that other people have explored since then, but I don't really remember coming across much of that before Stargate. So yeah, I think it deserves to be on the list.
Yeah. And of course, the next one is a book that I didn't really consider, but it probably should have been on my working list, and that was Starship Troopers. That book was published in 1959, was one of the first major books that dealt with military science fiction.
Interesting. I didn't even realize it was a book. Like, I knew there was a series, and I knew there had been some different stuff, but I didn't even know it's a book. That's very interesting.
I mean, prior to that, you only have a couple of pieces of real military science fiction. H.G. Wells' The Land of the Ironclads.
Okay.
And, a couple other things like that. But, we talked about it. Really, the 50s and 60s were the heyday of science fiction. Mm-hmm. There was so much amazing science fiction in that stretch of time. And, Starship Troopers is a great one. And that's he's got it here as basis for military sci-fi. And, while there were some military science fiction things that predated it, I would say that maybe it's more important than those.
Yeah, because that's the thing is something, just because someone does it first doesn't mean that someone doesn't do it better and make much bigger of a splash. I
mean, when you talk about H.G. Wells, nobody thinks about The Land of the Ironclads because it's overshadowed by his own work so much.
Right, exactly.
David, you got any thoughts on Starship Troopers, the book?
I didn't realize it was a book.
It is. It's a pretty good one.
Honestly, my only thoughts were, wait, is that the one with John Travolta? But no, that is, I'm thinking of like
that's
Battlefield Earth or whatever.
Yeah, that's Casper Van Dien.
That was a book, wasn't
it? Which one?
The one with John Travolta?
The one with John Travolta. The was it Battlefield Earth?
Battlefield Earth,
that
yes.
Horrible movie.
Yes, also a book.
Yeah. See, that's just where my mind was. That's my only thought on Starship Troopers is, wait, is that the one with John Travolta? But no.
Not that one. The other one.
Yeah, that's one of those one of the L. Ron Hubbard novels.
Okay.
The man that created Scientology.
And from my understanding, the novel was actually really good. Just the movie was horrible.
Yes.
Or
yes, and that's correct. It's a pretty important book. The movie was not very good.
Is that a novel that we should have considered for the novel?
It's probably. I think that the books that we arrived at probably more important than Battlefield Earth. But if we had pushed that list out a little bit and made it a little bigger, it would have been one that would have made sense to have landed on the list.
If we had actually done the same thing with the last round of lists we're going to do with the next round of lists, it would have probably made it.
Maybe. I don't know if I would say Battlefield Earth is a top 6.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was back on Starship Troopers.
Starship Troopers maybe. I would say Battlefield Earth, not a top 15 science fiction novel, but it's certainly a really good one that's worth reading.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
And honestly, for me, that was the hardest thing, was like, because all of the things that wound up on my list were not my favorites. Just as, there are things that have been really influential that it's like, may just not be my cup of tea, but it's like, it's really influenced how sci-fi kind of went forward.
Yeah.
So, alas.
And there's a couple things that I'm like, I have to stop and think, like, man, is The Princess Bride really a Portent's Son? Or is it just my favorite movie?
Right.
Because it's probably my favorite movie.
Isn't it everyone's like,
So
whose favorite movie is it not? It's got to be like everybody's favorite movie. It's the best.
It should be. If you've seen it, it's your favorite movie.
Okay, so my 6-year-old son and my 10-year-old daughter and my 40-year-old husband all equally love The Princess Bride. So that speaks well for it.
Yeah. But
So.
we'll have to get into The Princess Bride more when we start talking about fantasy. That's just an example. Like, it's hard to differentiate between your personal bias and what actually belongs up there.
Yeah,
right.
It's true.
The next one he's got on here would have landed on the miscellaneous list, in much the same spirit where we included the works of John Williams, the works of Ben Burt, Holst, Miyamoto.
Oh.
Wasn't Miyamoto a character in an episode of Chuck?
I don't remember.
Or maybe it's just a stand-in for him. Like it's a similar type of character. He created like a kill screen for one of his games, or it was anyway.
Yeah. There's something about him in there, but yeah. I mean, you're talking about the guy. In fact, I'll just read you the notes from the Backyard TARDIS here. It talks about him inventing, adding stories to games with Mario. He created Star Fox. And several other things. He worked on Nintendo has the Metroid and all those things that really we have because this guy was a visionary when it came to creating video games. He totally changed what a video game could be.
I mean, he created Mario. He created Legends of Zelda. Those are some of the most iconic, right?
Yep.
Video games.
So
yeah, definitely.
So yeah, I mean, as far as what we've read so far, a lot of these things were kind of on the bubble for why they didn't make our list. But honestly, this is one I didn't consider that probably should have been on our list.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that, especially because I even talked about.
You talked about video games, yeah.
And it just didn't click with me.
And then he has another game here, which it's Mega Man. And, I would say that would still fall under the category where we just kind of had a broad spectrum sci-fi video game category. But yeah, I mean, Mega Man certainly has been, was a big science fiction video game. I kind of want to jump down here to these last two he's got on his list, though. He has Voltron and Transformers.
I've thought about those since. That's the one of the that's one of the that and also Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Those are those three properties that have actually been on my mind of like I should have brought that up. If I could travel back in time, I would tell myself to mention that.
Right. Oh, well, I mean, a lot of the kids' entertainment, animated stuff from the early 80s, even G.I. Joe is very sci-fi.
Yeah.
Probably
got a lot of people into it.
And of course, Voltron was one of my favorites as a kid. I mean, I was a kid when the original came out. But the interesting thing about Voltron, you used to could find these on YouTube. I don't know if they're still there. There was a Japanese show called Beast King Go Lion. The
Okay.
it is,
Of course it is, because it's a Japanese show.
but it's literally it's the animation from the original Voltron.
Really?
And when Voltron was an effort to push that animation style into the US market. And so they redubbed everything, changed the story a little bit, but it's mostly the same.
It's basically the anti Power Rangers. They took an American show and changed the story and dubbed it in Japanese instead of taking a Japanese show and changing the story and dubbing it in English.
Granted, all of those shows were Voltron, Transformers to an extent. Transformers a little different, but yeah, even Power Rangers. I mean, all this Beast King Go Lion is the root.
Oh, okay. So Beast King Go Lion is the root that all these other things kind of came from.
Yes.
All right. Interesting.
Now Transformers was a little bit different, and of course you also got GoBots in there. I don't know if David remembers GoBots.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard of GoBots.
GoBots were interesting. I can't remember which toy company did GoBots. Let's see. Tonka. So basically, they got wind of Hasbro's Transformers that were about to come out. Mm-hmm. And so they rushed these things to market ahead of the Transformers.
Wow.
And they were never very good. They were always like subpar compared to the Transformers, but they rushed them out there to beat the Transformers to the market.
Wow. That is hilarious.
Yeah, I guess there's a reason I've never heard of them.
They were just that good.
Right.
That not good.
And of course now they're owned by, Hasbro owns Tonka now, so I guess Hasbro owns the GoBots and the Transformers now.
Wow, they got the market cornered.
But Voltron was a fantastic series, even the 80s version. But the version that Netflix did a couple of years ago was one of the best animated series I've ever watched.
I've heard it was really, really great.
Yeah. It's worth watching.
And the last thing he's got on his list kind of falls in the same category a little bit, except this started off more as it started off as manga, which was Gundam. But the Gundam stuff has been very popular with, manga and anime becoming popular here in the United States. Those have been things that have been very popular and spawned some.
Well, he says it's the original Japanese mech suit show. So is that like another precursor to like Voltron and Power Rangers?
Probably, sort of. I know that like what he's getting at is that like mech suits is pretty much a subgenre in anime. Just the idea of people in cool mech suits. If I would have thought about it, and I'm really not a fan of anime, but now that the Backyard TARDIS mentions it, we probably should have given a little bit of love to anime because I'm not a fan of it, but I know about it, and there's a ton of popular sci-fi anime, and there's a huge fan base.
Yep.
And it's tons of sci-fi. Ghost in the Shell,
right,
is a big one that comes to mind.
And I'm looking right now, and yes, the TV series for a Mobile Suit Gundam in April of 1979.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean that's a genre defining property. So yeah, that's a very interesting one to add to the list.
Yeah, that's very worthy, I'd say.
Yeah, for sure, and it fills in one of our weak spots because none of us have. Or the thing is we don't really have anybody on our cast here that's really that has ever really gotten that into anime.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of a weak spot for us. But yeah, that's certainly worthy of being on the list.
Yeah, he had some like whenever I read. In fact, I think he even commented when I read through his initial list that he dropped. It was like, oh well, duh. Well, yeah, that definitely. There were a few of them. I was like, I've never heard of this, but a couple of them was like, well, that definitely deserves to be there. How did I not think of that?
Right, but I mean, it's one of those things where most of our lists only have I think they all have between 12 and 14 items on them. That's not a lot.
Right.
You're going to miss a lot of things, and that's why I thought it would be fun to throw this out there and give someone a chance to say, well, hey, you missed this one, or because we were bound to get some good suggestions, and we did. And thank you to the Backyard TARDIS for those terrific answers.
Yes, give us some other fun things to add to our list of things we got to watch.
Marisha, where can people find you online?
You can find me at princessesandpadawans.com, on Instagram at princesses_and_padawans, and ppadawans on Twitter.
And David, where can people find you online?
You guys can find me on Twitter at stay_creativeed and on my YouTube channel, Creative D&D.
All right. You can find me running the Twitter account for this show at Sci_Fictionary. You can find me running our other podcast at Coruscant Radio Underground, where we talk about all things Star Wars. You can find us at thesciencefictionary.com. You can find me gaming regularly on my Twitch channel. My username there is darklighter580. You can drop us a line at thesciencefictionary.com. And as always, you can check us out at red5network.com, where you can find us along with the rest of our podcast family. And until next time,
Live long and prosper.